So what's reversible? So reversible cellular injuries occurs when the hypoxia, which is decreased oxygen delivery, causes metabolic and structural changes that can recover if oxygenation is restored before critical damage. Let's go through these steps of this, what we see with irreversible hypoxic injury. So if somebody have hypoxia, like we said, they want to be decreased oxygen delivery to the tissue, and as a result of that, that will lead to decrease in ATP production, right? And because of the decrease in ATP production, that means this pump is going to stop working, the sodium potassium ATPase, because there will be no ATP to be able to power the pump. And if the pump stops working, then sodium is going to accumulate inside the cell, right? We can't take the sodium out. And anywhere sodium goes, what follows? Water follows sodium. So now we're going to have sodium accumulate inside the cell, and the water follows, and that leads to cellular and organelle swelling. And what are the example of organelle? Same thing that we just mentioned, right? Your mitochondria, your endoplasmic reticulum, your Golgi apparatus, right? Those organelle are going to what? Are going to swell up. And this is the earliest light microscopic changes, and which goes back to the question that we saw earlier that asks us about what's the earliest changes that we see with hypoxic cellular injury. So the answer there would be what? Would be cellular swelling. So cellular organelle swelling. And the cellular swelling also causes the cell membrane to project out. So as the cell continues to swell, if you go back to our diagram, right, as the cell continues to swell and along with the organelle, so now the cell membrane can now be what? They could bulge out, right? Which is what we call them cellular blebbing, right? So cell membrane causes the cellular swelling causes the cell membrane to project out, which is what we call membrane blebbing. And a loss of microvilli and intramembranous particle could also be seen. So moving on to the next one. So as the cellular swelling continues, remember we mentioned that the organelle inside the cell are going to swell up. And then one of them is also endoplasmic reticulum. So due to lack of ATP, the endoplasmic reticulum is going to swell up. And that will lead to detachment of the ribosome from the rough endoplasmic reticulum. And then because of that, all those proteins that we need to export out of the cell will not be able to produce them. And that will lead to decrease in protein synthesis. And everything that we've been talking about so far, guys, they are all reversible cellular changes. And then lastly, if there is no oxygen, because if you look at the glycolysis pathway, right, you go from glucose, right, and then you go to pyruvate. And ideally, your pyruvate will be converted to acetyl, right, CoA. And in a normal day, right, this acetyl CoA is supposed to go to the TCA cycle, whereby we can use it to make what? ATP, right? Whereby we're going to use to make energy to be able to use to make ATP in the mitochondria. So if there is no enough oxygen, right, if you don't have oxygen, then this is not going to be possible. So now one of the fate of the pyruvate is that this pyruvate now will be shunted to production of what? Lactic acid. So cells relies on anaerobic, so now they will now be doing anaerobic metabolism, whereby because of lack of oxygen, so they will not be able to go into the TCA cycle. So this will lead to decrease in glycogen production and an increase in lactic acid. And because of increase in lactic acid, that will decrease the intracellular pH, right? Because of the acid. And because of decrease in intracellular acid, that will cause the chromatin inside the nucleus to clump together.